About a year ago I made a video about how to operate a slow combat model with a bladder tank, and at the time people asked, how do you make a bladder tank? And it's a year on and people are still asking, so I suppose I'll do a video about how to make a bladder tank for a combat model. Bladder tanks being a stretchy rubber compartment to hold the fuel and force it into the engine under pressure, and that's something you do to help maintain nice engine settings under aggressive manoeuvring, such as in control line combat. So here we have three bladder tanks. They're all quite similar in concept, but slightly different materials and construction techniques between the three. So the green one uses a pure latex tube. It's natural latex inside and coloured latex on the outside to protect it from sunlight. That comes from MBS Model Supply in Kansas, United States, one of the best sources for control line and free flight equipment in the world. And this one measures, I think it's a 7/16 of an inch outside diameter, 1/16 wall thickness, and that is one of the very nice options. There is another size which is a bit smaller, which is 3/8 of an inch outside diameter and 1/16 wall thickness, so 3/8 being about 9.5, and that gives an inside diameter of 1/4 inch. So that's a very good one. This is that same size, 3/8 outside, 1/4 inch inside, but black rubber all the way through. This is another one that's become more common, which is very thick. It's almost well, in fact it probably is 3 millimeters thickness. So yeah, about 11 millimeters on the outside and 6 on the inside. So the thicker wall thickness gives much higher pressure and theoretically makes it more resilient, but in practice we're finding that they only last for three uses, whereas some of these coloured ones will last for 10 or 20 uses. So latex fuel compartment, silicone fuel tube. This is cheap AliExpress silicone tube. It works okay, but brand name stuff like Dubro is much better, and the other one is neoprene as per diesel engines, the black stuff here, and nitrile tube, which are theoretically tougher, but they're also a bit more expensive and hard to find, so I generally just use silicone. Now the hidden parts of the bladder tank are the fittings in each end. So there's a plug in one end, a simple plug that just turns it into a blind compartment, and they are made of various things. Irrigation plugs from a hardware store for garden irrigation, just a piece of rubber O-ring around about 6 millimeters in diameter is another good one, or custom made plugs for different sizes. Up this end we've got a fitting in this one to adapt from the large diameter latex to the small diameter silicone, and that's one of these are ones that I've made. You can probably buy them, but I find that the bought ones are never quite right. They're never quite the right size, so they don't fit well. They pop out and they leak sometimes. And there's the plug to go with it. It's just a plain old plastic plug turned up on the lathe with a groove in it to help it stay put. These two here with the smaller diameter internal hole allow for a different method, which is my preferred method, which is to put a small tube inside the silicon to swell the silicon tube up so that it's a nice clean fit inside there. So this one is stainless steel crimp. It works quite well. What I've started doing now is using plastic tube, which is in fact the plastic tube from inside a bathroom cleaner spray bottle, and it's a sufficiently hard and resilient plastic that you can just cut off a 10 millimeter length of that, squeeze it into the fuel tube, so that it's completely inside the end of the silicone tube, and then plug that in. In fact, better on this one, and then plug that in here and clamp it up with a cable tie. Another way of having a fitting is using a 90-degree irrigation fitting, or even just a 0-degree one, and then that plugs onto there. But I find they don't fit very well, and they come loose and get in the way eventually, so I don't use those. So I'll start with the green, larger diameter latex tube. Plug goes in one end, and then cable tie it on. Pull the cable tie as tight as you can. It has to be very tight to avoid leaking. Sometimes it is easiest to pull it tight with a pair of pliers and then nip it off. The adapter on the other end. Cable tie, pull it tight, nip it off, and that is your basic bladder. And then, just like this one, silicone tube over the top, ready to go. For the smaller sizes, so the 1/4 inch internal diameter, 6.35 millimeters, it'll just be these 4 or 5 millimeter silicone tubes with the tube inserted into them. So just plug it in, get your cable tie ready, make sure it's about in the middle of the strongest part of the tube. Pull it tight. So this really thick stuff needs to be pulled extremely tight and then nipped off. And then you can either use one of these plugs, put the plug fat end first, I find, unless you've got one that's a really good close fit. It needs to be in fat end first, otherwise it'll leak. Or the thick rubber rod from an O-ring. It's probably a slightly better way of doing it. The O-ring ready. Put it right over it in the middle and pull it really tight. Nip it off. There we go. So, once you've got your fresh new bladder tubes ready, the next stage is to train them, and that means making it so that they expand from this end and not from that end. This end goes into the bladder tube, and you want it to start expanding there so that it pushes the excess tube out of the compartment. If you start at this end and it expands, it'll get stuck. This end pushes into the compartment and then it ends up folding over, and that doesn't work very well. So to train it, we use a big syringe. This is a 100ml medical irrigation syringe that came from MBS Model Supply. It's very, very good. But you can also use a conventional syringe with a suitable fitting on there to suit the fuel tube. I'll do this one first. So this one's already been trained, so you can see what's supposed to happen. So it swells up from the end. The new green one. So to make it swell up at the end, you have to restrict it everywhere else so that the only place it could possibly expand is at that free end. Pump it up a bit. And then again, and again, 3 or 4 times, and now it'll always want to start from that end, no matter how much you put into it. And the black thick-walled one, so this is the very thick 3mm one, same story, but you've got to push a lot harder for these. In fact, you may not even be able to do it. There we go. Pushing hard. So now, forevermore, that one will always expand from the end. There we go. That's how you make bladder fuel tanks for combat models. And as you can see, this one having been used, it's got a tiny little nick. That's where it'll burst. So one of the things when you get a bladder that's damaged, you've used it several times. They can last anything from 1 time to 20 times. Some of mine have lasted, these orange and green ones last a long time, so they'd usually get it at least 10 to 20 uses. But when they are past their best, you don't want them to break in combat, so you break them yourself.